Welcome to Decoding Leadership, where we break down the elements of humane and effective leadership. I'm your host, Jade Rubick. Task forces sounds like probably as boring as talking about taxes, but there are a set of problems that you will run into as a leader where task forces are this brilliant way to respond to your problems. And so what are some examples of times that you might employ this special technique? If you are in a situation where the way the organization is structured does not fit what you need to drive some outcomes, a task force is something you can turn to. It's basically like a temporary team that is either full-time or part-time that works against a particular problem. And task forces can drive brilliant results in these situations. So I'm going to talk about task forces today and give you some tips on how to execute on them successfully, and also tell a couple of stories of times where I've seen them employed really, really well. I hope you find it useful. Let me know what you think. Let me give you a couple of examples of some times I have seen the task force pattern used really well. One was earlier in my career when I was at Relic. I'm pretty sure I was a VP of engineering at this point. And there was this kind of problem in the company that we had basically ignored a development in the industry, this move towards microservices. We had ignored it for too long, and it was becoming this huge deficiency in our product. All of the other vendors had really filled this space much better, and New Relic was starting to look like an old-fashioned product as a result. And so there was this kind of urgent need to deliver some results that showed that we were remedying our tardiness to this. There was a conference in 6 weeks, and we decided we were going to deliver something at that conference that showed a step in that direction. The problem was we hadn't actually done very much. And so we had to turn around some results really quickly. At the time, I was responsible for this part of the organization. I was not responsible for the product direction, but I was responsible for the technical leadership of it. I was going to go on vacation in a couple of weeks, which was a really bad timing, but I couldn't get out of that. And I needed to put together something that I really knew was going to be successful and deliver really good results. And so I thought about all the different ways I might structure this. I could steal a couple people from some relevant teams and have this slightly larger team just completely focus on it. I could have a really good project manager or engineering manager that was acting as a project manager who would run this effort across a couple of teams. Or I could do a task force. And so I'll talk about what that is in a second. The problem was we basically needed to do some work in a couple of different teams in a couple of different places. And my biggest concern was that the communication between those teams was going to result in things going slow. Like even if the teams individually were producing really good results, if they weren't integrating their work or talking with each other very frequently, the frequency of communication, the bandwidth of communication, tends to overwhelm actual execution delays. And so if you're not communicating really frequently, you're much more likely to be delayed than if you're not executing really quickly. Communication delays overwhelm everything else. I think that's actually really true. And so what I did in this case was I put together a task force. I figured out who was going to lead it. I worked with my managers to select the right group of people to be on temporary team. And I gave them a very clear guidance on what we needed to accomplish. And probably had one of the best kickoff meetings I've ever had. I think it was, in some ways, some of the best work I've ever done. And we spent a day just really carefully going over what we wanted to deliver, how we were going to work together, what the expectations were, what success looked like what the market was like, what our customers were really looking for. We walked out of that meeting just 100% focused. Like, we knew everything, like how we were going to work together, where we were going to sit. We were in person at the time. And it was something that I'm still pretty proud of because I think it went extremely well. Yeah, the results of it, we totally nailed it. Like, we delivered a very impressive small feature that demonstrated what we were trying to do. It was very well received. It was done on time. And I actually went on vacation and it all went really well anyway. And that was something I was just really proud of. I had a time recently where I saw somebody, not myself, but somebody else really successfully pull off the task force pattern. And so I also wanted to give this as an example. The situation is, there is a company that I was at pretty recently. I was head of product and head of engineering. And there was something very similar to a merger that they were going through. And they basically had to integrate two companies and all of the processes, all of the ways of doing things. And they wanted to basically rationalize all of the technical systems. And initially, the way that they were talking about this was that it was a technical project and that it just needs to be something that engineering can take care of. They can write these features, and of course, we can get it done in a certain amount of time. My concern about that was that the project involved a lot more actual process. It would involve people changing the way they work. It involved training people on those changes. It involved making sure that we validate that those improvements actually work and produce the results we want. And even though there was definitely a business need to do this as rapidly as possible, I was concerned that I, as a product leader, I would basically be telling the entire company how to run. And that seemed a little out of scope for just product. Am I going to tell all these people how to do their jobs? Am I going to be the best person to do that? And I was replying to some of the other executives and trying to make this point. And one of the other executives, I think, pulled exactly the right maneuver. I was very impressed with her response. She basically said, okay, clearly there's a lot more discussion and a lot more going on. She didn't use this terminology, but she said, I'm going to basically pull together a task force of people, and we will all meet regularly and go over this topic and basically farm out all the action items and make all this stuff happen. And she put together a really excellent agenda and ran a really good meeting. And I think what she did was actually pretty brilliant. It may seem like a logical thing to do, but nobody else was doing it. I wasn't doing it. In retrospect, that's what I should have done. But that's basically the beauty of a task force pattern, is that you can use it either to assemble a temporary team, or you can do it to assemble a temporary group of people to solve a particular problem. And so I think it's a very valuable tool to have in your management or leadership toolbox. And I think it's just a very useful pattern. I have some tips for running task forces effectively. First of all, the setup of a task force is really important. You don't want people to think it's a waste of time. You need people to really buy into it. It needs to feel important. So the kickoff is often really essential for your task force. The first meeting needs to be really well done. You need to plan it, make it really solid. Often, if you can do it at an offsite or some sort of an occasion where you're able to really give good context or whatever, that can be fantastic. One way you can sometimes borrow some legitimacy or use other leaders' power is you can get the task force blessed by somebody higher up in the chain. A task force can be kind of a sneaky way of using the resources of other departments or basically make stuff happen that's outside of your real sphere of influence. And so sometimes going higher up in the chain or getting some sort of official blessing for it can be a useful part of it. It is important that you select the right people for your task force. You don't want it to be too big, but you also want to have the right people there. I would spend some time before you actually put it together, making sure that you test your thinking and make sure you get the right people. One danger of a task force is that the opportunity costs of assembling a task force are often hidden from you. So you may be causing a lot of devastation to other projects or other initiatives. That is something to make sure you try and sense before you do the work. Usually a task force is around something that's actually urgent, or in the second example where it was something that was really big, it was about making progress on it incrementally over time and getting us all on the same page. But be careful not to overuse task forces. They shouldn't be happening all the time. And if they are happening all the time, that is probably a sign that your organization actually isn't very well structured, or people don't know how to work well together, or there might be some other structure that needs to be in place. I think that's all I have to say today about the task force model. Let me know if you have any questions, and I hope this was helpful. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Decoding Leadership. As always, I welcome your questions and feedback. And if you're looking for coaching or advisory help, you can contact me at rubick.com. See you next time.